Hi Flosstube, I'm here at the Daughters of the American Revolution Museum in Washington, D.C. Going to go to their new exhibition, Sewn in America, Making Meaning and Memory, which is open until December 3rd, 2024. It's a wonderful exhibition exploring all of the different ways that women and some men picked up the needle to create American history. Now, they have a wonderful catalog. They have things in the exhibition that go from clothing to samplers to quilts to embroidery and a whole lot of other wonderful things. It's a beautiful catalog, and I've picked up 2 extra copies for those who are watching my Flosstube series. You can go down into the description area for the Flosstube video. You'll find a link and some discussion about the drawing. You can put yourself in the mailing list for the copies of the catalog. 2 people will be chosen at random that sign up in the mailing list, and I'll announce that later who those winners are and send you a copy. Now, let's get in the backpack and go inside. The Daughters of the American Revolution Museum is located very close to the White House. Inside, along with offices, are the museum with exhibit halls and period rooms, as well as a library. The exhibit, Sewn in America, takes up the second portion of the exhibit hall, with the front being a study collection that has been heavily stacked with textile objects such as quilts and embroidered objects that augment the exhibition. Personally, I cannot walk by any drawer that looks like it could be related without opening it. So before we walk into the official exhibit, I was drawn to take a peek inside these drawers. What I found exciting about the exhibition was that it explored all aspects of using the needle, and so there was a large variety of American embroidered, quilted, and sewn objects, and not just samplers. We tend to focus so much on schoolgirl samplers that sometimes we forget that men and women used needles and that samplers were only the beginning of a lifetime of making things for practicality and expression. That said, there were a few wonderful samplers in these drawers that I just have to stop and ogle with you, such as this colonial Boston example worked in 1770 by Sarah Diamond. It can be hard to see a sampler close enough when it is in a drawer, and since I know that the DAR Museum was an early partner with the Sampler Archive, this is a perfect example of a time that you can use the archive to look closer with me to see what is going on in that densely stitched center. So off to samplerarchive.org we go. I can use the search function and choose the DAR as the contributor. Then I know the sampler was 1770 and made by Sarah Diamond. So here we get it up. The reason we came here was to get a bit more information, such as her location, Boston, but really to see the details of the sampler better in this center area. As we magnify it, we can see that Sarah likely had a drawing she was embroidering, looks like a lot of stem stitch, and then she stitched the background in counted work. That's a really, really interesting way to go about it. Another sampler is from 1791 by Nancy Tucker, aged 8. This is also on the Sampler Archive site, where it assigns it to a likely Essex County, Massachusetts origin, and gives you the same ability to look closely. But here are the photos I took in the exhibit. I recommend that you hunt out some of the objects we will see on the Sampler Archive site now that you may want to see something closely. Always fun to have a few rabbit holes to go down. Opening up another drawer had a very sweet assemblage of infant caps made in the most delicate whitework, some on net, some on fine cotton lawn, and one knitted with very fine cotton. They are almost all mostly 19th century, and I have placed the object numbers on top of the images in the video here so you can look up the descriptions and any more information on them on the DAR Collections search website. There are more pictures of each there on the website. You can imagine the mother or a close relative making these for an impending newborn. I had to tear myself away from the drawers, which I can go on and on about what's inside. But I would like to comment that I wish all art museums had drawers like this set up so more textiles could be seen by visitors. This is a wonderful way to store objects for minimal light impact, laying flat so that the public can see them and learn. Perhaps many of our guilds should actually donate the funds for things like this. As you enter the exhibit, you are greeted by the byline of the exhibit, Making, Meaning, and Memory. I really liked this about the exhibit. Making was first and highly represented in the choice and way objects were displayed. Making takes time, teaching, practice, technique, and materials, and both the catalog and exhibit found ways to express this. It is a viewpoint that is often overlooked because many historians prefer to discuss topics that they are interested in, such as design representation and meaning, often culled from literature. But making gives context that is highly important and something that I am now beginning to demand gets a voice by writing academically about embroidery from the perspective of the material engineer, embroidery teacher, and practitioner of the technique. I applaud all the ways that Alden O'Brien, curator of the exhibition, found ways to ask questions that highlight this, including in a talk she gave about estimating the time sewing took in the average woman's life. The first display you see represents this question with a dozen average garments handmade by women for family members. In her talk, Alden read from diaries about the seasonal sewing and even made mathematical estimates of how long seams take to work to give her numbers. She found from diaries that women mentioned picking up their needle from 5 to 25 days a month as adults. From these examples of homemade garments, the exhibit also treated mending, using professionals to make full garments or your own or patterns for yourself so you could make your own clothes, and the move from fashion magazines to crazy printed patterns like these. Look at all those crazy dashed lines on this piece here. Can you imagine using this to make your own patterns? Making was also celebrated in this interactive display for visitors and children to try cross-stitch that was sponsored by Witchold Imports. You may know them as they bring many linens into the country for our embroidery. I found the display quite nice. Turning to quilting, I loved this broderie purse quilt block that must have been a UFO in someone's stash basket. Using Indian prints, the woman cut out flowers and placed them on the background and used silk thread to satin stitch them down over the raw edge. Often this was done in buttonhole stitch, but when I looked closely, it seemed like satin stitch was used on this piece, but I could be corrected. The colors chosen to highlight the prints was delicious, as were the flowers and leaves from the original printed fabric. But looking closely, I found that flowers of more typical English and American gardens were there as well, such as pansies. They weren't in fabric, but were embroidered in place with what looked to be a combination of wool and silk thread. The maker also made these amazing flowers and leaves in wool thread as well to help complete the design. The quilts in the exhibit ranged from antique to modern pieces with an emphasis on the meaning portion of the exhibit. That could be sampler type quilts such as these two, which were made of blocks often made by members of a family or church for someone westward bound. This one was made by members of the Society of Friends in Burlington, New Jersey, shortly before Edith Sykes' marriage, and may have been a gift. I don't know if Edith was also moving at the time. A delightful presentation was the turned over back of a quilted petticoat from Rhode Island with a portion of its ship and a mermaid able to be seen better on the dark fabric of the back. This was an example of one of 25 petticoats made in shipping communities on the coast of Connecticut and Rhode Island that quilt historian Lynn Bassett writes about in the catalog. One of the more moving pieces was a modern quilt made by Reverend Michelle Bolt as part of the collective grief during COVID-19. This stunning quilt was begun to record the COVID-19 cases and deaths in Knox County, Tennessee, and has a color key in the side. Each square represents a week, with case colors coded from the lowest numbers in pale green to peaks in deep pink, and deaths from white, meaning none through the shades of gray to black, increasing in number. She intended to stop when the epidemic was over, but you can see that hasn't happened as the ribbons of fabric extend to represent the continued cost of the pandemic. There are some lovely samplers in the exhibit, as well as some very interesting ones made from surprising people. This family record sampler, made by Sarah Stevens of Chelmsford, Massachusetts, a town not far from me, was made in 1822 but not finished. A hallmark of these family record samplers was that they were picked up many times and the birth of a new child or death of someone was recorded, often showing up in a different shade of silk, like on this piece. Her mother's death 6 years later was recorded in a thread that faded more than the rest. I own several samplers from the middle of Massachusetts that were made in school and left empty to be used later in life as family records, the fancy stitching being completed in school. Amy Newell, who was formerly the curator at Sturbridge Village in Massachusetts, has written extensively on these types of samplers with evidence of adults stitching on them. Another theme in the exhibit was needlework learning by slaves or indigenous populations in missionary schools. This rare sampler was worked by a Hawaiian girl in 1841 at the Waluku, I think it's pronounced Waluku, Female Seminary, a missionary school on the island of Maui. Signed by Maka, her identity wasn't able to be traced, but only the letters were used from the Hawaiian language. Was the sampler to teach literacy, or, as some missionary samplers were in Africa, to be sold to supporters as examples of how the girls were being anglicized? We don't know. Another example I will show you, and I only have the back that I took a picture of, but this is a perfect reason to show you how you can see the exhibit if you can't get to Washington before it closes. I have saved this episode at the request of Alden O'Brien until they posted the virtual exhibition website so I could refer to it. So that is perfect, as I can show you the front of the sampler. I will have the web address of the virtual exhibit below in the show comments. But going there gives you pictures and descriptions of all the objects. Scrolling down, I can find the sampler in question. It was one of 2 samplers worked by George Eisenbray of Philadelphia. Yes, samplers worked by boys. He did one at age 8 and then this one a little later. You might think he was going to become a tailor, but no, he became a firefighter, and tragically, he lost his life in a fire at age 23. I hope that I've given you a taste of the exhibit and that you sign up for my mailing list below to get a chance at winning one of the catalogs. Maybe even visit the exhibit or virtually. There is also a symposium attached in November, and if you go, you will find me in the crowd. Well, wasn't that amazing, that exhibition, Sewn in America, at the Daughters of the American Revolution Museum in Washington, D.C. I hope you enjoyed joining me in my backpack for a Travels with Tricia in Washington, D.C. And if you like these types of episodes, please subscribe.